So today we'll be talking about head coverings in the ancient world, in particular, ancient Assyria. We're going to be looking at an excerpt from the Middle Assyrian Laws, and these laws were excavated from the site of Assur and date back to 11th century BCE copies of earlier 14th century BCE tablets. So these are pretty old laws, and there's some fun and interesting features about the Akkadian text that we'll talk about compared to the other Akkadian texts we've been studying. Now, this is always a fun topic because it's useful for helping us understand the tradition of Middle Eastern head coverings, whether they be Jewish or Christian, especially in reference to Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 11, or the hijab in the Islamic tradition. Now, an examination of the ancient Assyrian laws is not to say that this is the context for any of the Abrahamic religions and their head covering traditions, but it is something to give us some context for the Middle Eastern culture of head covering. Mind you, these laws date back roughly 1400 years from the time of Paul alone. So I don't think it's wise to just come to the conclusion that, okay, this is what Paul's talking about or the background to head coverings. But either way, Akkadian is a useful dialogue partner for better understanding the cultures and traditions of the Middle East. So we're going to be looking at it at this cultural issue, but also while looking at the Akkadian itself. So this is from Law 40, and I've taken excerpts of it. It's not the full law itself. The full law is probably 2 to 3 times as long as the excerpt we'll be looking at. So I'll go ahead and just read the Akkadian. Now, mind you, we have a good idea how Akkadian was pronounced, but there could be different ways in which it actually was pronounced. You'll notice that this is the Assyrian dialect, so it's going to be different than the Old Babylonian version that most people start out learning their Akkadian with. Lu ashat aile, lu almanatu, ulu sinishatu, ashurayatu sha'anarebete utsani, qasina la patu. And that gives us something like wives of a citizen, or widows, or any Assyrian women who go out into the main public square, or let's use the words of Martha Roth, thoroughfare, shall not have their heads bare, right? Now, I'm going to have us look real quick at some of the cognates that we find in Hebrew. Of course, if you speak Aramaic or Arabic, even Ethiopic, and you'd like to, Ethiopic Ge'ez or even some of the modern languages of Ethiopia and Eritrea. Let's see what fits. But I find that many of these words really work with Hebrew. And so we can start off with wives. So ashat is in the construct or the bound form, and it just means the women of, right? So you may know Isha in Hebrew as wife or woman. So that's very similar here. And this is just the plural in Akkadian. Almanatu is, of course, our plural for widows, and that's like our Hebrew almanah. Rebete is interesting. And look, that's a different way of writing ribtu, which you may notice in Old Babylonian. That actually has to do with the shape of a square. So we could call it a thoroughfare. I'm putting in parentheses here the public square, just so that you can associate with the root reba'ah, which you know as a square or four-sided object. Utsani is from Watsu in Akkadian or Yatsa in Hebrew. And then finally, the word for bare, it's really leave their heads open, right? So patu is related to our Semitic root patach. And of course, we have that in both Hebrew and Aramaic, as well as Arabic, ftaha, right? Ina rabete, something, ilakani, uptatsanamma. When they go about in the main thoroughfare, in the day, in the day, they shall be covered. So those of you doing the Akkadian class, you should be able to recognize and parse uptatsanamma and all of the different features of it. So what stem is it and what enclitics are present? This is from the root pasanum, which we may recognize from earlier Babylonian as pasamu or pasamum. And that has to do with being veiled or covered. I've seen a word in Sureth in modern Assyrian, pasa or passe, for a veil. And so I haven't really seen it in other Semitic languages. If you know of something from a similar root to veil, go ahead and post it in the comments. Of course, you recognize ume as yom, referring to the day, and ilakane, going back to halak, more Hebrew terms here that we can recognize. Esirtu ishtu beltisha inarebete talukuni pasunat. A concubine who goes about in the main thoroughfare with her mistress is to be veiled. So you see the idea of the mistress or the lady. A concubine who goes about in the main thoroughfare with her lady is to be veiled. And you'd recognize Beltisha, her lady or her mistress. This is related to Baal, Lord, that you would recognize in Hebrew. Aramaic, Baalto, is a wife. So, that's not far off. The lady of the house, right, is the wife, the Baalto. So here we have Belti. Baalto is just the Syriac. Esirtu for a concubine probably has to do with someone being bound to something. And so it'll be from the root asir. Kadiltu shamutu achzushini inarabete patsunatma shamutu la achzushini inarabete kakasapatu la tuptasan. A married kadiltu woman is to be veiled when she goes about in the main thoroughfare, but an unmarried one is to leave her head bare in the main thoroughfare. She shall not veil herself. So what is a kadiltu? Maybe it's associated with like a sacred prostitute or someone who has a history with the temple cult. There's a lot of literature on this, and most of it you'll find under kadishtu, which, if you know Aramaic, it's kadishto. Just means a holy female person. And the shift here with kadiltu versus kadishtu is a feature of this dialect of Assyrian Akkadian. And of course, you notice her head kakadsha becomes kakasa, so that's not too different. Instead of shina, we have shini as part of this dialect. A lot of fun features, with dialectical Akkadian. And we're just going to cap this off with Harmitu la tuptasan kakasa patu. A prostitute shall not be veiled, her head shall be bare. So the word for prostitute, Harmitu, you should recognize that from a word like a harem. This is someone who, we still have this word in Akkadian. Somehow it survived and made it to English today via Middle Eastern languages and the Sultan's harem and things like this, but it has an antecedent in Akkadian. So pretty cool, pretty cool. So just to sum up, there's really a difference in an awareness of who can wear their hair uncovered and who should have it veiled when they're in public. Why? Because the veil is probably a sign of authority or being tied to one's family, and it probably, this is the case for husbands especially. And those who aren't in such a relationship, like the prostitute, for example, she shall not be veiled. So something to keep in mind, those who are unveiled versus those who are veiled walking in a thoroughfare, what might that say about them during this period, right, culturally, and how might that impact the way we understand different religions from the Middle East over time? If you have any questions about this passage, please go ahead and post them, and I will see you next time.